This is the United States Energy Association Power Sector Podcast. I'm your host, Herman K. Trabish. I've covered the power sector since 2006, and I currently report for Utility Dive. My guest is Rob Gramlich, founder and president of power sector consultant Grid Strategies, which engages policymakers, energy agencies, system operators, and regulators at the federal, regional, and state levels on the opportunities of and challenges to building urgently needed new transmission. Rob is lead author on the just released first comprehensive review of the benefits and the barriers in coordination, collaboration, and open information sharing between stakeholders for transmission planning and development. In this USEA podcast, we're going to talk about that just released study, which is an analysis of 29 major transmission expansion projects. It identifies the concrete benefits from collaboration by stakeholders to obtain better information, make better use of existing assets, rights of way, and technologies, and in deciding how to share the costs of transmission. It shows that where these practices have been used, they've reduced costs as much as several $billions. Rob, the practices your paper describes seem to be no-brainers, and they've been effective when they've been used. But the oddly balkanized and interdependent U.S. transmission system doesn't lend itself to collaboration. You write that efforts to bring down costs through competition seem to have exacerbated the problem because transmission building is a natural monopoly. Can you explain these things and tell us a little bit about how we got here?
Sure, Herman. Great to be with you. Yeah, you have to go back a ways to find these examples of very large transmission construction. But of course, you look on the map, we know we have these big lines and they came from somewhere. And so it was an interesting sort of walk back through history, looking at a lot of old documents and talking to people who've been around for a long time to examine these 29 cases. We all know transmission's really hard and really important. So we were just looking for what can we glean from these examples about what works, what's important, what can we learn about how to get transmission built because people did it before. And collaboration was the theme that we found. Often a half dozen utilities, public, investor-owned, different types of utilities, as well as sometimes generators would be involved in these. And that type of collaboration with the entities, from what we learned, we're really sharing all sorts of information with each other about their systems, about loop flow, which is power flow around neighboring systems, as well as different technology options, et cetera. It was a very collaborative approach. And of course, that's not how people operate in competitive businesses. And what we see these days, I think generation competition is working great. And but of course, there are rules about, you can't share information with your competitors. So people operate very differently in the competitive environment versus the collaborative environment that got all the transmission built. So we were, mostly kind of pointing out that difference and just saying whatever policymakers do, try to enable and foster the type of collaboration that was so successful in getting transmission built.
So what you mean by a natural monopoly is that these projects are such large undertakings that it kind of makes sense to give one person some heavy responsibility for getting it done, but they need support. Is that what you're essentially saying?
Yeah, the 330 transmission owners roughly we have in this country are, essentially natural monopolies, and that matters here because, the natural monopoly just sort of means bigger is better, just based on the economic characteristics of the sector. And it's also influenced by the fact that there's incredible, interaction between one line and another line. It's a highly networked industry, right? So networked natural monopolies, which are a very different, beast than the standard economic, competitive market type of structure where it's more,
Right.
atomistic, individual, small entities Here, it just makes sense to have one big entity running the system for an area. So that's why we have utilities that are regulated utilities in these areas. And that's still, that's sort of how the industry was created. And that's still basically the structure of the industry today. But then, what's interesting for getting transmission built is sort of the role of those utilities, just given the fact that there are natural monopoly regulated utilities. How can they be involved and how can they work with each other? So much of the
Right.
challenge now is transmission between them and across them. And so how do you get them working together and collaborating?
One of the really interesting things about the paper is that it makes so clear the multiple benefits from collaboration. But regulatory constructs, things like rights of first refusal, encourage local transmission owners to avoid collaboration on valuable large projects. Can you describe the key benefits to electricity customers where transmission developers have shared information, used existing assets and other innovations, and coordinated development to achieve more ambitious and cost-effective projects?
Sure. So um, there's basically better information comes out of it. The quality and quantity of information that feeds into the plan is better when parties are collaborating, right? Nobody, it's sort of like everybody sees their part of the elephant, and when you put it all together, you can get the full image of the elephant, but no one person has that. So that's the main thing. And of course, these networks are regional. Ultimately, even though we have 330 transmission owners, we really have three grids, right? So the Eastern, Western, and Texas grids, each one is its own elephant. And it just helps to get everybody working together to say, well, here's what I'm seeing on my part of the elephant that I can see. Um, as the report says, the quality and quantity of information, enabling a more holistic view of system needs, allowing better use of existing assets and rights of way. That's important because obviously rights of way are very scarce and hard to get, it's hard to get new ones, but sometimes you can upgrade, you can rebuild, or you can reconductor on rights of way. Um, and coordinate when you get to construction, then coordination of outages becomes important. So all of these things, as well as the cost allocation and cost recovery, are important. Cost allocation and recovery, meaning if there's a regionally important network line, there's going to be a lot of different beneficiaries, so they have to kind of work together to figure out who's going to pay how much. So these are all the benefits and the types of things that utilities and stakeholders have collaborated on.
And you can see that when you're building a line that's going to cover a lot of ground, multiple jurisdictions, one utility or stakeholder of another kind could know that there are lines ripe for reconductoring. There are areas where rights of way are hard to come by or easier to come by. And all that is seeing parts of the elephant, as you put it. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, that's right. If everybody brings more information to the table, then you can identify some of these options. Reconductoring is an area I'm particularly excited about, just again, given the scarcity of rights of way, but the technology options to, install more efficient cables, things like that can come out of these collaborations.
Yeah, we did a podcast with Jim Hecker not long ago, former FERC chair, and he was talking about rights of way, and he was saying, find out where there are existing rights of way that you can use. That's another a railroad, a local railroad may know where they want to provide access to their rights of way. That's another piece of the elephant, right?
That's right. And for example, MISO has their long-range transmission plan. They approved $10 billion of new transmission last year for their tranche one, and about 85% of those lines are actually on existing rights of way.
Wow. Okay. But the paper also describes explicit rules against collaboration. antitrust rules or something, and unnecessarily rigid definitions of needs and benefits that interfere with collaboration. And it says that there are disincentives to sharing information. Again, some sort of fear of antitrust violations or something. But those things can be addressed, you say in the paper, by policy reforms and by clarifying where the jurisdictions are between regional system regulators. Can you talk a little bit more about the barriers and the reforms that can address them?
Sure. Yeah, it gets to the the differences in how industries operate, if they're competitive industries versus regulated industries. Um, and it's possible that the restrictions that you find in competitive markets, and these are like antitrust rules about collusion, or any of your listeners who are part of an association probably hear a little antitrust blurb at the start, right, from the
Uh,
association staff are saying, we are not here to discuss any coordination on prices or carving up. Like, there are laws. You can go to jail for
mm,
sharing certain types of information, right? And that's as it should be in a competitive market context, right? But
mm,
in a regulated industry, it's usually very different. And sharing information is encouraged. Um, Currently, the U.S. transmission sector is sort of this hybrid between the two, and I think it's
mhm.
just confusing because we see very different rules and protocols around the regions. In some places, you can't talk to, like, a transmission owner is not allowed to talk to the regional transmission planner, um, at least privately. You have to do it only in the big stakeholder meetings with 100 people. Um, and in other areas, there's, sort of full unfettered collaboration and sharing of information and working together, or two or three or four utilities might partner on a project, and, there's nothing preventing them from doing that in their region. So it's just, we just noticed that sometimes these rules against information sharing are overly restrictive and harming the productive sharing of information that would lead to better plans. And so we didn't do any full evaluation of right of first refusal, or where and when exactly competitive bidding for transmission could occur. That'd be something else somebody else could do. But we are just identifying the benefits of collaboration, noting that it seemed to be a common feature of all these successful 29 examples of good transmission building, and um, suggesting to stakeholders and policymakers that whatever they do on some of these issues, that they really try to foster and enable all this effective collaboration.
Mm. Okay, we don't have a lot of time left, but the paper is perhaps the most valuable part of the paper, in fact, is the examples of where collaboration and information sharing, those kinds of things, have really fostered successful projects. It goes back all the way to the Tehachapi projects, which is now almost 20 years ago, building the lines that brought some of the first wind projects into Los Angeles. And then the gold stars for cooperation at Southwest Power Pool's balanced portfolio and priority projects, and the MISO MVPs, most valuable projects. Could you tell us a little bit about how collaboration fit in some of those projects, maybe others that you find better examples?
Sure. Yeah, those are good examples. MISO multi-value projects originally started with the CapEx group of utilities in the upper Midwest, working on what they thought would be a good set of projects. Um, and it fed then into MISO to kind of coordinate it all and put together the specific plans. Um, I mean, there's a number of others that are more private developments, like Western Spirit out in the West, that was involved the New Mexico Transmission Authority. So there are and private investors like Goldman Sachs in that case. So there are a lot of different
Hmm.
types of entities. It's not all investor-owned utilities. You got transmission authorities, you got public power. One of the examples is Transmission Agency of Northern California, TANC, on the California Oregon Transmission Project. Pacificorp had a few here. Navajo West and South Transmission Systems. The Pacific DC Interties that goes way back.
Hmm.
That's 50 years old. That actually President Kennedy was instrumental in getting that approved. It was energized in 1970. Path 15, if you remember, for those who were around during the California
California.
crisis, the constraint there in the middle of California was a huge problem, and Path 15 was a collaborative effort involving a Power Market Administration, WAPA, to get that built, as well as a private developer, Transelect. So there are a lot of these examples that are, some of them a little bit more traditional regional planning, like an RTO like MISO, others with a PMA or a infrastructure investor or a transmission authority. But the point is, most of these significant lines had multiple parties kind of contributing in the ways that they were able to contribute.
We just had Elliot Mainzer from the California Independent System Operator on the podcast recently, and he described how one of the newest projects, Transwest Express, was a major collaboration. But you'll have to listen to the Power Sector podcast to hear more about that because we're out of time. I got to thank you, Rob, Grid Strategies founder and president, Rob Gramlich, for sharing insights from his new analysis of 29 major transmission expansion projects that identifies the concrete benefits of coordination, collaboration, open information sharing that will get transmission planning and development done that the United States urgently needs these days. And as always, I also want to thank our listeners for taking the time to check out the USEA Power Sector Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share with everybody you know our quest for energy transition solutions.